Hey guys, tonight we're setting sail on a rather pungent journey. You're going to find yourself transported back to ancient Rome, a place of marble temples and bustling forums, legions marching and emperors ruling, but also a place where dinner often involved a splash of something truly unique. Imagine the aromas wafting from a Roman kitchen, spices from the east, roasting meats, fresh bread, and then, cutting through it all, a deep, complex, intensely savory, and yes, undeniably fishy smell. That, my friends, is the scent of garum, the secret sauce that powered the Roman palate. It was everywhere, on everything, and made using methods that might make your modern stomach churn just a little. Seriously, if you were transported back in time without a gas mask and a strong constitution, you probably won't survive this particular olfactory assault. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, maybe drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always cool to see where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing there, in a bustling Roman market, the sounds of haggling merchants and distant chariots filling the air. But it's the smell that truly grabs you, not just the usual market smells, but something else, something deep and fermented, like a fish market that's been left in the sun for a month, but, somehow, appealing? To a Roman nose, anyway. This is the world of garum, the ubiquitous fish sauce that was as fundamental to Roman cuisine as salt or olive oil. You might think of it as ancient Rome's version of ketchup or soy sauce, but that comparison doesn't quite capture the complexity, or the sheer intensity, of the real thing. It wasn't just a condiment, it was a flavor enhancer, a cooking ingredient, a source of nutrients, and even, surprisingly, a medicinal remedy. Historians still argue whether the absolute earliest origins of fermented fish sauce lay with the Greeks or perhaps even further east. But it was the Romans who truly perfected its production, scaled it up to industrial levels, and spread it across their vast empire. They didn't just make it, they refined it, creating different grades and varieties, each with its own specific flavor profile and intended use. You see, just saying garum is a bit like saying wine today. It could mean anything from a cheap, rough plunk to a prized, aged vintage. The Romans had their equivalents, from the high-end garum sociorum made from specific Spanish mackerel, to simpler, cheaper sauces made from whatever fish scraps were available. Imagine trying to cook anything in ancient Rome without garum. It would be like trying to make a modern stir-fry without soy sauce, or a classic French dish without butter. It provided that deep, umami richness that we now get from things like MSG, aged cheeses, or concentrated broths. The Romans didn't have access to many of the flavor boosters we take for granted. Sugar was a rare luxury, spices were incredibly expensive imports, and techniques like long simmering to develop deep flavors were time-consuming. Garum offered an instant hit of intense, savory flavor that could transform even the most basic ingredients. You might wrinkle your nose at the idea of fermented fish guts, and honestly, that's a perfectly reasonable reaction. But think about some of the things we eat today: aged cheese, sauerkraut, kimchi, even yogurt. All products of fermentation, often involving bacteria that sound less than appealing on paper. The Romans just applied that principle to fish. And they did it with a level of dedication and technical skill that's frankly impressive. This wasn't just throwing some fish in a pot and hoping for the best. This was a carefully controlled, albeit pungent, industrial process. One mainstream historical fact you quickly learn is that garum production was a massive economic enterprise. Archaeological sites across the Roman world, from Spain and Portugal to North Africa and even Britain, revealed the remains of large-scale garum factories, complete with extensive vats and processing areas. This wasn't just a backyard operation, it was a major industry, employing many people and generating significant wealth. The amphorae used to transport garum have been found all over the empire, silent testaments to the vast trade network that distributed this precious, stinky cargo. It was as important a commodity as grain, olive oil, or wine, sometimes even used as a form of payment or taxation. Now for a slightly quirkier tidbit. While primarily a foodstuff, garum also had medicinal uses in Roman belief. Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman natural historian, mentions it being used to treat various ailments, including dog bites, dysentery, and even cosmetic issues like skin blemishes. You can almost hear the Roman doctor prescribing, "Yes, yes, for that persistent cough, just a spoonful of fermented fish sauce before bed. Builds character, if nothing else." You can imagine bringing that bottle to a modern pharmacy. "Yes, I'm here to pick up my garum prescription." Probably wouldn't go over well. The sheer scale of production meant that garum wasn't just for the elite. While the most prized varieties were expensive, there were cheaper versions accessible to ordinary Romans. Soldiers carried it on campaign, laborers used it to flavor their simple porridges, and it was a staple in homes across the social spectrum. It provided not only flavor but also protein and salt, essential components of the Roman diet, especially before refrigeration made preserving fresh food easier. So, as you mentally wander through that Roman market, the smell of garum is unavoidable. It's the scent of Roman life, Roman trade, and Roman taste. It tells you that flavor was paramount, even if the methods seem a bit extreme by modern standards. You start to understand that this wasn't just some weird, historical oddity. It was a fundamental building block of their culinary world. And you begin to wonder, how exactly did they make this stuff? What went into those vats? What was the process that transformed humble fish into liquid gold, or perhaps liquid funk? That's what we're about to explore, peeling back the layers of history, and maybe holding our noses just a little, as we dive deeper into the very particular Roman methods for making the perfect garum sauce. You've felt the market buzz, caught that distinctive whiff, and started to grasp just how central garum was. But why? Why did an entire empire, spanning diverse cultures and climates, become so utterly dependent on fermented fish sauce? It wasn't just a habit, it was a fundamental culinary need. Think about taste not just as sweet or sour, but as layers of complexity. Today, we talk about umami, that deep, savory, Moorish flavor found in things like mushrooms, aged meats, and yes, fermented foods. The Romans didn't have the word umami, but they absolutely understood the concept, and garum was their ultimate umami bomb. Imagine standing in a Roman kitchen. No refrigerators, obviously. Sugar is a luxury item, often imported from places like India, used sparingly, if at all, by most people. Spices like black pepper, cinnamon, and cloves are incredibly expensive, traveling vast distances along trade routes, accessible mainly to the wealthy elite. Techniques like long, slow simmering to develop deep flavors in broths or stews are possible, but time and fuel aren't always readily available for everyone. So, how do you make simple, staple ingredients like grains, pulses, vegetables, and sometimes basic cuts of meat taste exciting and satisfying? You add a splash of concentrated flavor. Garum provided that instant depth. It wasn't just salty. The fermentation process broke down the fish proteins into amino acids, particularly glutamates, which are the compounds responsible for that umami taste. It transformed bland food into something rich and compelling. A simple porridge of barley? Add garum, and suddenly it's savory and complex. Boiled vegetables? A drizzle of garum elevates them. Even meat dishes, which might otherwise be a bit one-dimensional, gained layers of flavor from this potent sauce. It was the Roman chef's secret weapon, the culinary equivalent of a cheat code for deliciousness. Historians still argue whether the absolute earliest origins of fermented fish sauce lay with the Greeks or perhaps even further east, but regardless of its ultimate birthplace, it was the Romans who embraced it with unparalleled enthusiasm and integrated it into nearly every aspect of their cooking. It was used not just as a finishing condiment, like squirting ketchup on fries today, but as an essential cooking ingredient, incorporated into sauces, stews, and dressings. Roman recipe collections, like the famous Apicius, are full of dishes that call for garum. Seriously, try reading through some ancient Roman recipes. It's garum this, garum that, garum everywhere. They were obsessed. Beyond flavor, garum offered practical benefits. It was a significant source of salt, which was crucial for preservation before refrigeration. Salt was also vital for the Roman diet, especially in hot climates, helping to replenish electrolytes lost through sweat. Garum provided protein and other nutrients from the fish, making it a valuable addition to the diet, particularly for those who couldn't afford fresh meat or fish regularly. It was calorie-dense and packed a nutritional punch in a small volume. Think of it as an ancient Roman power-up, giving you energy and essential minerals. A slightly quirkier tidbit about garum's appeal comes from its perceived health benefits. As we touched on in the last section, ancient writers like Pliny the Elder attributed various medicinal properties to it. While modern science might raise an eyebrow at curing dog bites with fish sauce, the belief in its restorative or healing qualities undoubtedly added to its value and desirability in Roman society. It wasn't just food, it was seen, by some at least, as a kind of liquid wellness tonic. Imagine sipping a bit of garum when you feel a cold coming on. Just a little fermented fish, dear, it'll clear you right up. Might not be the most pleasant cold remedy you can imagine, but hey, different times. The sheer demand for garum across the empire highlights its fundamental role. It wasn't a niche product, it was a staple. From the emperor's table to the soldier's mess kit, garum was present. This widespread consumption wasn't just a matter of taste, it reflects its practicality and nutritional value. It was relatively stable for transport and storage compared to fresh fish, making it an ideal commodity for feeding a vast empire. You could carry a sealed amphora of garum with you on campaign or trade it across provinces. Think about the modern equivalents that play a similar role in our diets: soy sauce, fish sauce, the Southeast Asian varieties, even yeast extract spreads like Marmite or Vegemite. They provide that concentrated savory flavor that enhances other foods. The Romans were ahead of the curve in recognizing the power of fermentation to unlock this kind of taste profile on an industrial scale. They didn't just stumble upon it, they actively cultivated the process, understanding, perhaps intuitively, the transformative power of enzymes and salt on protein. So, when you imagine the Roman craving for garum, don't just picture someone wanting something salty. Picture someone wanting that deep, satisfying flavor that makes food truly delicious. Picture someone needing a source of protein and salt in a world without modern preservation. Picture someone reaching for a condiment that could make even the most humble meal feel substantial and flavorful. It was the backbone of their culinary world, the secret ingredient that tied dishes together and satisfied a deep, perhaps even primal, need for intense savory taste. It wasn't just about masking the taste of food, it was about enhancing it, adding complexity and richness that was otherwise hard to achieve. It was the flavor of Roman life, and it was utterly indispensable. Now that you understand why they wanted it so badly, the next question naturally arises: how did they get the right ingredients to produce this liquid gold, or pungent brown liquid, depending on the grade? What kind of fish, or lack thereof, actually went into those vats? You've felt the market buzz, caught that distinctive whiff, and started to grasp just how central garum was. You understand why they craved that umami hit. And now you're wondering, what exactly went into those vats? Was it just any old fish? Or did the Romans have particular preferences, a specific Piscean palate they needed for their liquid gold? Well, you're right to ask. While it's true that some garum was made from whatever scraps were available, the fish heads, guts, and trimmings left over from processing fish for consumption, the finest, most prized varieties were made from specific types of fish, and often, specific parts of those fish. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Romans absolutely had a hierarchy of fish for garum, directly impacting the quality and price of the final product. Think of it like making wine. You can make something drinkable from many grapes, but a Grand Cru demands specific varietals from a specific place. The undisputed king of garum ingredients, particularly for the legendary Garum Sociorum, often translated as Garum of the Allies, or Company's Garum, likely referring to a specific trading company or region, was the mackerel, especially the Atlantic mackerel, *scomber scombus**, and the Spanish mackerel, *scomber japonicus**. These oily fish were highly valued because their flesh and, crucially, their guts, are rich in the enzymes needed for the fermentation process. The oil also contributed to the texture and flavor of the finished sauce. Imagine huge schools of mackerel being netted and brought directly to the garum factories along the coast. But it wasn't just mackerel. Other oily fish like tuna, anchovies, sardines, and sprats were also commonly used, either alone or in combination. The key seemed to be the oil content and the availability of the fish in large quantities. Garum production was an industrial process, remember, requiring tons of raw material. So, whatever fish were abundant in a particular region were likely candidates. Along the coasts of Hispania Baetica, modern Andalusia in Spain, and Lusitania, modern Portugal, where some of the most famous garum was produced, mackerel and tuna were plentiful. Further east, in areas like North Africa or the Black Sea, other local oily species would have been used. Now, about the particular methods part. It wasn't just the type of fish, it was also the parts of the fish. While whole small fish could be used, especially for cheaper grades, the guts, blood, and gills were often considered essential ingredients, even when using larger fish like tuna. This is where it gets a little squirmy, perhaps. The viscera of the fish are packed with those powerful enzymes that break down the proteins. Without them, the fermentation process would be slow and inefficient. So if you were processing tuna for its meat, the leftover guts and blood wouldn't be wasted. They'd go straight into the garum vat. Waste not, want not, right? Though in this case, want not means produce incredibly pungent fish sauce. This focus on specific fish parts, particularly the guts, leads us to a slightly quirkier tidbit. Some ancient sources suggest that the quality of garum was directly linked to the freshness of the fish guts used. The enzymes are most active when the fish is very fresh. This meant that garum factories needed to be located right next to fishing ports or have systems in place to transport the fish, and their precious guts, quickly from the boats to the vats. You can picture the scene: boats docking, fishermen unloading their catch, and workers immediately separating the valuable offal for the garum vats before the enzymes lost their potency. It was a race against time, and against decay, in the pursuit of perfect fermentation. Imagine being the person whose job it was to sort the fish guts based on freshness. That's a job description you probably won't find on LinkedIn today. Historians still argue whether the exact proportions of fish flesh, guts, blood, and salt were standardized across the empire, or if each factory and region had its own closely guarded recipe. It's likely there was regional variation, influenced by local fish availability and culinary traditions, but also a general understanding of the principles involved in creating different grades of sauce. Was there a secret ratio of mackerel guts to salt that made garum sociorum superior? We don't have a complete ancient cookbook detailing every factory's formula, so some of the precise methods remain a subject of scholarly debate. Beyond the oily fish, other ingredients could be added, although the core was always fish and salt. Sometimes, other seafood like oysters or sea urchins might find their way into the mix, potentially adding different flavor notes, or contributing different enzymes. For certain specialized products, like Nuria, which was made primarily from fish blood and brine, the focus shifted slightly, but the principle of enzymatic breakdown remained central. So, while the image of Romans just throwing any old fish into a vat is partially true for the cheapest forms like alec, a paste made from the sediment left after straining garum, the production of high-quality garum was a more discerning process. It required selecting the right species, those oily, enzyme-rich powerhouses, and often utilizing the parts that modern sensibilities might shy away from, but which the Romans knew were essential for unlocking that deep, savory flavor. It was a practical approach, born of necessity and culinary wisdom, turning perishable goods into a valuable, shelf-stable, or vat-stable, commodity. They weren't just making sauce, they were performing a kind of biological alchemy, transforming humble fish into a flavor concentrate that would fuel an empire. It makes you look at a can of sardines a little differently, doesn't it? Thinking about the potential contained within those tiny, oily bodies. Choosing the fish was just the first step in filling those massive fermentation tanks. Next, you needed the crucial partner in this pungent dance, the ingredient that wasn't just a flavoring but a preservative and a catalyst: salt. And lots of it. You've chosen your fish, selected those oily, enzyme-rich powerhouses, ready to unlock their hidden umami potential. But fish alone, even the freshest, enzyme-packed mackerel guts, would quickly turn into a putrid, unusable mess if left to their own devices. No, you needed a crucial partner in this particular Roman dance of decay and deliciousness: salt. And not just a pinch, you needed mountains of it. Salt was the silent, salty essential, the ingredient that transformed potential rot into liquid gold, the unsung hero of the garum vat. Think about salt today. It's cheap, ubiquitous, something we barely think about beyond seasoning our food or melting ice on roads. But in the ancient world, salt was incredibly valuable. It was essential for preserving food long before refrigeration existed. It was a key commodity, traded over vast distances, sometimes even used as currency. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, which was originally money given to Roman soldiers to buy salt. This is a mainstream historical fact. Salt was a cornerstone of the ancient economy and a vital strategic resource. Controlling salt sources or trade routes could grant immense power. So, when you picture a Roman garum factory, you're not just seeing fish processing, you're seeing a place that consumed vast amounts of a precious, controlled substance. Salt's role in garum production was multifaceted. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, it was a preservative. A high concentration of salt creates an environment where most spoilage-causing bacteria simply cannot survive. This prevents the mixture from simply rotting in the sun. Instead, the salt allows the fish's own enzymes, and potentially some salt-tolerant bacteria, to do their slow, controlled work of breaking down the proteins. It's like putting the fish in a state of suspended, enzymatic animation instead of letting them just decompose in a bad way. Secondly, salt acts as a catalyst and regulator for the fermentation process. It helps draw water out of the fish tissue, creating a concentrated brine. This brine is where the magic happens. The enzymes within the fish, primarily proteases in the guts, begin to break down the complex proteins into simpler amino acids and peptides. This is where the umami flavor comes from, those free glutamates we talked about earlier. The salt concentration controls the rate of this enzymatic activity. Too little salt, and spoilage bacteria take over. Too much salt, and even the desirable enzymes are inhibited, slowing the process down too much. The Romans, through centuries of trial and error, figured out the right balance. How much salt are we talking about? The recipes and archaeological evidence suggest it was a significant proportion of the total mixture, often around 10 to 25% by weight, sometimes even higher. Imagine layering fish scraps with shovelfuls of coarse salt. It wasn't a delicate seasoning, it was a structural component of the mixture, creating that dense, salty mash within the vat. You'd need a steady supply of salt, likely sourced from nearby salt pans along the coast or from inland salt mines. The logistics of getting enough fish and enough salt to these factories was a major undertaking. The type of salt mattered too. While we don't have precise records detailing every factory's preference, it's likely they used coarse sea salt produced by evaporating seawater in shallow pans, or rock salt mined from deposits. Impurities in the salt, such as other minerals, might have even subtly influenced the flavor of the final garum, adding another layer of complexity that modern refined salt wouldn't provide. Imagine the gritty texture and the sharp, clean smell of ancient sea salt being mixed with the oily fish mash. This brings us to a slightly quirkier tidbit. Some ancient sources describe different types of garum based not just on the fish used, but also the brine created during the process. The liquid that naturally accumulated from the fish and the dissolving salt was sometimes treated as a product in itself, or a key component of the final sauce. The color and clarity of this brine were indicators of the quality of the fermentation. A clear, amber liquid was highly prized, while cloudy or off-colored brine might indicate problems with the process. It suggests a level of observation and understanding of the fermentation nuances that goes beyond just fish plus salt equals stinky sauce. They were paying attention to the details, even down to the look of the salty liquid pooling in the vat. Historians still argue whether there were standardized salt-to-fish ratios mandated by authorities or if these ratios varied significantly based on local tradition, fish type, desired product quality, and even the time of year or ambient temperature. Was there an imperial standard for Garum sociorum, or did each major production site like Bailo Claudia or Cartier develop its own successful formula through generations of practice? The truth is probably somewhere in between, a general understanding of the principles with significant regional variations. The process within the vat, once the fish and salt were layered, was a slow transformation. The salt began to draw moisture out, forming brine. This brine permeated the fish, creating that high salt environment. The enzymes in the fish, now active in this salty liquid, started their work. It wasn't a rapid, bubbling fermentation like making beer or bread. It was a gradual, quiet breakdown, happening over weeks or even months, depending on the temperature and the specific recipe. The salt was the silent conductor of this biological orchestra, ensuring that the right notes were played, enzymatic breakdown, and the wrong ones, putrefaction, were silenced. Imagine the effort involved in handling these quantities of salt. Transporting it, storing it, measuring it, and mixing it into the vats would have been hard, physical labor. The workers at a garum factory would have been constantly exposed to salt, on their hands, in the air, coating everything. You'd develop a permanent thirst and probably some very rough hands. It makes you appreciate the simple act of reaching for a salt shaker today, knowing the ancient effort required just to get this essential mineral where it needed to be, especially in the quantities needed for industrial-scale garum production. So, while the fish provided the raw material and the enzymes, salt provided the control, the preservation, and the environment for the magic to happen. It was more than just a flavoring. It was the chemical backbone of the entire process, ensuring that the vats produced not just salty fish, but the complex, umami-rich sauce that the Romans couldn't live without. It was a testament to their understanding of natural processes, even if they didn't have the modern scientific terms for enzymes or osmosis. They knew that fish plus salt plus time plus heat equals garum. And the salt played the quiet, essential role in making that equation work, turning perishable protein into a stable, valuable commodity. With the fish chosen and the mountains of salt ready, the next step was creating the perfect container for this pungent alchemy. These weren't just random holes in the ground. The Romans designed specific structures to house their fermenting fish, building the fermentation tank. You've got your carefully selected, oily fish, those enzyme-rich powerhouses ready to get to work. You've got your mountains of precious salt, the preservative and catalyst that will control the transformation. But you can't just leave this pungent mixture lying around. You need a vessel, a container strong enough to hold tons of fish and brine, durable enough to withstand the elements and the corrosive salt, and designed specifically for this particular brand of biological alchemy. Enter the Roman fermentation tank, the heart of the garum factory. These weren't just random holes dug in the ground. Archaeological sites across the Roman world reveal sophisticated, purpose-built structures designed for garum production. This is a mainstream historical fact. The scale and engineering of these garum vats demonstrate that it was a major, industrialized process, not a series of backyard operations. You find these complexes, often located right by the sea for easy access to fresh fish and salt, with rows upon rows of these large tanks. Imagine standing next to one. They were typically rectangular or sometimes circular, dug partially or fully into the ground and lined with durable materials. The most common lining was opus signinum, a type of waterproof concrete made from crushed pottery or tiles mixed with mortar. This material was tough, relatively impermeable to the salty, acidic brine, and provided a smooth surface that was easier to clean, relatively speaking, of course. Imagine trying to really clean a vat that's held fermenting fish for months. Sometimes, large ceramic jars, *dolia*, were partially buried and used as vats, especially for smaller batches or different grades of garum, but the truly industrial-scale production relied on these large, built-in tanks. The size of these vats varied, but many were massive, capable of holding several cubic meters of fish and salt. Some were large enough that a person could easily stand inside them, though you probably wouldn't want to. even if they were empty. Picture tanks that are maybe 2 to 3 meters long, 1 to 2 meters wide, and 1 to 2 meters deep. Multiply that by dozens or even hundreds of vats in a single factory complex, and you start to get a sense of the sheer volume of garum being produced. We're talking about the capacity to process tens or even hundreds of tons of fish at a time. It's like a modern factory floor, but instead of assembly lines, you have giant, stinky fermentation pits. The design wasn't just about size and material, it also incorporated practical features. Many vats had sloping floors leading to a drain, or a smaller collection basin at the bottom. This was crucial for drawing off the finished liquid garum without disturbing the solids at the bottom. You could open a plug or a tap at the base and let the precious sauce flow out, leaving the fish solids behind for further processing into alec. This shows a level of engineering and foresight. They designed these things for efficient production and collection of the final product. It wasn't just a hole. It was a carefully constructed piece of industrial infrastructure. Historians still argue whether there was a standardized blueprint for these vats across the vast Roman Empire, or if designs evolved regionally based on local materials, available expertise, and the specific type of garum being produced. While there are common features like opus signinum lining and drainage systems, there's also variation in size, shape, and layout between sites in Spain, North Africa, and Italy. Was there a central Roman engineering manual for garum factories, or did successful designs simply spread by word of mouth and observation? It's likely a bit of both, with core principles being adopted and adapted locally. A slightly quirkier tidbit about these vats is the sheer persistence of the smell. Centuries later, archaeologists excavating these sites can sometimes still detect a faint, lingering fishy odor associated with the vats, especially on hot days or after rain. The porous materials absorb the pungent aromas over decades or centuries of use. Imagine digging up ancient pottery and instead of just dust, you get a whiff of 2,000-year-old fermented fish. Talk about a trip down memory lane. Or maybe just a trip to the nearest source of fresh air. It serves as a powerful reminder of the sensory reality of these places. You could probably find these sites blindfolded, just by following your nose. The location of these factories was also key to their design and efficiency. They needed to be near the coast for the fish and salt, but also accessible by land and sea for transport of the finished product in amphorae. Sites like Belo Claudia in Spain or Leptis Magna in North Africa show extensive garum production facilities integrated into larger port cities, demonstrating their economic importance. The vats were often situated in open-air courtyards, exposed to the sun, which, as we'll see, played its own crucial role in the fermentation process. Building these vats was a significant investment in labor and materials. It required skilled masons and laborers to excavate the pits, build the walls, apply the waterproof lining, and install the drainage systems. These weren't temporary structures. They were built to last, intended for decades of continuous production. The sheer scale implies a long-term commitment to the garum industry. Imagine the construction site, dust, noise, shouting, and the ever-present background smell of, well, everything associated with a Roman port city, soon to be joined by the distinct aroma of the vats themselves. So, the garum vat was much more than just a container. It was a piece of specialized industrial equipment, designed to facilitate a specific biological process on a massive scale. Its construction, materials, and features were all geared towards efficiently transforming tons of fish and salt into liquid garum. It represents a significant Roman technological achievement, albeit one focused on something that smells rather strongly. They built empires, roads, aqueducts, and temples, yes, but they also built sophisticated factories for making fish sauce. It puts their priorities into fascinating perspective, doesn't it? They needed that umami hit, and they were willing to build substantial infrastructure to get it. With the vats constructed and ready, the next step was filling them, initiating the process that would transform raw ingredients into Rome's favorite condiment. It was time for the messy, layered work to begin, piling death upon death for deliciousness. You've got those robust vats, dug deep and lined with waterproof concrete, ready to receive their pungent cargo. The sun beats down on the open courtyard of the garum factory. The air, already thick with the scent of the nearby sea and maybe a hint of drying fish nets, is about to get a whole lot more interesting. With the containers built, it was time to fill them, to begin the layering process that would kickstart the transformation. This was the messy, hands-on work, the initial steps inside the vat that laid the foundation for Rome's favorite sauce. Imagine the scene. Boats arrive at the nearby dock, laden with the day's catch. Workers, perhaps slaves or low-paid laborers, are already sorting the fish. The best go for fresh consumption or other processing, but the oily species and, crucially, the guts and trimmings, are destined for the garum vats. Baskets and carts are filled with shimmering, scaly bodies, glistening guts, and dark blood. This raw material is then transported, quickly, to the factory courtyard where the waiting vats stand like hungry mouths. The process began with layering. This is a mainstream historical fact. Roman sources describe the method of placing alternating layers of fish, or fish parts, and salt into the vats. There wasn't a single, rigid recipe that applied everywhere, but the core principle was the same: fish, then salt, then fish, then salt, building up the mixture layer by layer until the vat was full, or nearly full, leaving some space at the top. Think of it like making a truly enormous, incredibly salty, and very fishy lasagna, but without the cheese or the pleasant aroma. The purpose of this layering was strategic. It ensured that the salt came into direct contact with as much of the fish material as possible, as quickly as possible. Remember, the salt's job is to prevent putrefaction and create that high salinity environment where the right enzymes can work. By layering, they maximize the surface area for the salt to begin drawing moisture out and dissolving, forming the crucial brine that would permeate the entire mixture. It wasn't just about mixing everything together. It was a deliberate construction designed to initiate the enzymatic breakdown efficiently while keeping spoilage at bay. The ratio of fish to salt was critical, though historians still argue whether there was a standardized proportion used across the empire, or if it varied significantly by region, fish type, and the desired grade of garum. Some ancient recipes suggest ratios ranging from 1 part salt to 3 parts fish, up to 1 part salt to 5 parts fish. Achieving the right balance was key. Too little salt and the mixture would rot. Too much, and the enzymatic action would be too slow, potentially yielding a less flavorful product over a much longer time. This suggests a level of empirical knowledge and practiced skill among the garum producers. They knew, perhaps by smell, sight, and experience, what the right balance looked and smelled like as the process began. The fish material itself could vary. For the highest quality garum sociorum, whole small oily fish like mackerel or anchovies might be used, layered with salt. For other grades, it was often a mix of fish scraps, including heads, bones, blood, and especially the guts, combined with pieces of larger fish like tuna. Imagine the texture, slimy, scaly, bloody, mixed with coarse, gritty salt. The laborers filling these vats weren't doing clean work. It was messy, smelly, and physically demanding, shoveling or carrying heavy baskets of this raw material and distributing the salt evenly between the layers. A slightly quirkier tidbit relates to the timing and specific ingredients used in the first layers. Some ancient texts hint at beliefs that the success of the batch depended on the auspicious timing of the start, or even the inclusion of certain starter materials in the very first layer. While we lack detailed records of such superstitions from every factory, it wouldn't be surprising in the ancient world for practical steps to be intertwined with ritual or belief. Perhaps the first fish into the vat came with a small offering, or the process only began on a specific day of the lunar cycle. We don't know for sure, but it adds a fascinating layer of human behavior to the purely chemical and biological process. Imagine the head foreman saying, "Okay, boys, full moon tonight, Mercury's in retrograde, perfect time to dump these fish guts." Once the vat was filled with these alternating layers of fish and salt, the initial work was done. The mixture wasn't just left open to the elements immediately, though. Often, the top layer would be heavily salted, and sometimes a lid or covering was placed over the vat, perhaps weighted down, to help press the material and ensure the salt penetrated quickly and evenly. This initial period, perhaps a few days, allowed the salt to really start working, drawing out moisture and creating that crucial brine. the sheer volume of material involved was staggering. Filling a vat capable of holding several cubic meters would require tons of fish and hundreds of kilograms of salt. The logistics of sourcing, transporting, and handling these quantities highlight the industrial nature of garum production. It wasn't just a small-scale artisanal craft. It was a major economic activity requiring significant infrastructure, labor, and capital investment. Picture the scale. Not just one vat, but dozens, maybe even hundreds, being filled simultaneously or in rotation at a large production site. The air would have been thick with the smell, the ground potentially slippery with brine and fish scales. The layering wasn't static. Over the first few days or weeks, as the salt dissolved and the fish began to break down, the volume of the mixture would decrease. The layers would settle, and the brine would start to collect. This initial settling was a crucial part of the process, indicating that the salt was doing its job and the enzymatic action was beginning. The mixture would transform from distinct layers of solid fish and salt crystals into a more homogeneous, mushy mass submerged in salty liquid. Think about the smells evolving during this initial phase. Fresh fish has a certain smell. Salt has a clean, sharp aroma. But as they combine and the enzymes start working, the scent would begin to change, becoming more complex, more intense, starting its journey towards that distinctive, powerful garum aroma. This wasn't the finished product smell yet, but the first hints of the biological transformation taking place within the vat. It was the smell of proteins breaking down, of amino acids being released, of the future umami bomb beginning to form. So, the act of layering the fish and salt wasn't just about getting the ingredients into the vat. It was a deliberate technique, refined over generations, designed to maximize the efficiency of the salt's preservative action and kickstart the enzymatic breakdown process. It was the foundation upon which the entire fermentation would rest, a messy, smelly, but ultimately crucial step in transforming raw, perishable fish into a stable, valuable, and incredibly flavorful commodity. It was the beginning of the long, slow process where death truly began its transformation into deliciousness, all thanks to the careful arrangement of fish and salt within those purpose-built tanks. With the vats filled and the layering complete, the mixture was left to its own devices, allowing the real workers of the process, the enzymes, to begin their stinky, transformative work. You've carefully layered the fish and salt in the massive vats, a pungent, glistening monument to future flavor. Now, the initial manual labor is done. The workers step back, the sun beats down, and the real transformation begins. The heavy lifting, the truly stinky work, is now taken over by tiny, invisible forces, the enzymes. This is where the biological magic happens, turning that raw, layered mixture into the liquid gold, or brown, that was garum. Think of enzymes as microscopic biological machines, specialized tools found within living organisms that help speed up chemical reactions. In the case of garum, the most important enzymes are proteases, which are proteins that break down other proteins. And where are these enzymes found in abundance? Primarily in the guts of the fish, but also to some extent in the fish flesh itself. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Romans, perhaps through generations of empirical observation rather than scientific understanding, knew that including the guts was essential for efficient garum production. They understood, intuitively, that the insides were key to the process. Without those enzyme-rich organs, the breakdown would be much slower and less complete. So, within that salty, layered vat, the salt is doing its job preventing the wrong kind of breakdown, putrefaction by spoilage bacteria, while simultaneously creating the perfect environment for the right kind of breakdown, enzymatic activity by the fish's own enzymes. The enzymes, particularly those from the guts, start attacking the complex proteins in the fish muscle and tissue. They chop these long protein chains into smaller pieces, peptides and then individual amino acids. This is the crucial step that unlocks the flavor. Remember that umami taste we talked about? That deep, savory richness? It comes largely from free glutamates, which are one type of amino acid released when proteins are broken down. The enzymes are essentially predigesting the fish, transforming its structure and releasing those flavor compounds. It's not just proteins either. Fish also contain fats, and other enzymes, called lipases, work to break down these fats into fatty acids. These fatty acids also contribute to the flavor profile of the garum, adding complexity and richness. So, the enzymatic process is a comprehensive breakdown, transforming the entire fish matrix into a liquid laden with flavorful molecules. It's a slow, quiet riot happening on a molecular level within the vat. Imagine billions upon billions of tiny enzymes munching away, systematically dismantling fish structure, piece by smelly piece. This process takes time. It's not an overnight miracle. Depending on the temperature, which we'll get to, the size of the fish pieces, and the salt concentration, this enzymatic breakdown could take several weeks to several months. The mixture in the vat gradually changes. The distinct layers you piled in section 6 start to disappear. The solid fish material softens, breaks down, and becomes a mushy, semi-liquid mass submerged in the increasingly concentrated brine. The volume decreases significantly as water is drawn out and solids liquefy. A slightly quirkier tidbit about this enzymatic phase is the visual and textural transformation. Ancient descriptions, combined with modern attempts to recreate garum, suggest the mixture becomes quite viscous and homogeneous, almost like a thick, dark soup or a very coarse paste, before the clear liquid garum begins to separate and pool on top or at the bottom. It's not pretty. It's a bubbling, shifting mass of decomposing fish and salt. Imagine stirring this stuff daily, which we'll also get to. You'd be plunging your stirring pole into this transforming, enzyme-driven soup. It's a far cry from stirring a modern pot of soup on your stove, that's for sure. You probably wouldn't want to get any splashes on you. Historians still argue whether the Romans had any conscious understanding of enzymes as biological catalysts, or if their knowledge was purely empirical. They simply observed that fish guts plus salt plus time plus heat produced the desired result, and that adding guts sped things up and improved the outcome. Did they have theories about tiny workers or spirits within the fish doing the job? Or did they just know the recipe worked through trial and error over centuries? It's likely the latter, a deep, practical knowledge passed down through generations of garum producers. They knew the what and the how, even if the why in scientific terms was beyond their reach. The temperature plays a significant role in the speed of enzymatic activity. Enzymes work faster when it's warmer. This is why garum factories were often located in sunny, coastal areas and why the vats were typically open to the sky. The heat from the sun, section 8 incoming, dramatically speeds up the enzymatic breakdown process. In cooler climates or during winter months, the fermentation would proceed much more slowly. This natural regulation by temperature meant that garum production might have been seasonal in some regions, or that batches started in warmer months finished faster. Think about the smell again during this phase. It's not just a fishy smell anymore. It's the smell of proteins breaking down, of amino acids and volatile compounds being released. It's the smell of fermentation, distinct from simple decay. It's intense, complex, and undeniably powerful. If you stood downwind of a large garum factory during peak production season, you wouldn't need a sign to tell you what was happening. Your nose would know. It's the smell of biological transformation, the scent of those enzymes diligently working away, creating flavor from fish flesh. It's a smell that would permeate the surrounding area, a constant olfactory reminder of the industry taking place. You might even catch a whiff if you lived nearby, a daily reminder that Rome's favorite condiment was bubbling away just down the street. This enzymatic process is the core of garum production. It's what distinguishes it from simply salting and drying fish. It's the biological engine that converts raw material into a complex, liquid sauce. The Romans didn't need beakers and microscopes to understand that something fundamental was happening inside those vats. They could see the fish breaking down, they could smell the change in aroma, and they knew that eventually, this messy, smelly process would yield the prized sauce they craved. It was a testament to their ability to harness natural processes for their own benefit, even if those processes seemed a bit unappetizing by modern standards. They trusted the enzymes, guided by the salt and the sun, to do their stinky, essential work. With the enzymes diligently at work within the vats, their activity is greatly influenced by external factors, particularly the warmth provided by the sun. The Roman sun wasn't just for tanning and drying laundry, it was a vital contributor to the biological magic of fermentation. So, the enzymes are hard at work inside the vats, those microscopic biological machines diligently breaking down the fish proteins, turning structure into flavor. But like any good workers, they perform better when they're warm. And in the Roman world, without electric heaters or climate-controlled factories, the primary source of that crucial warmth was the sun. The Roman sun wasn't just for getting a nice tan, though maybe the garum workers got one, minus the pleasant smell. It was a vital, active ingredient, a powerful contributor to the biological magic of fermentation. Imagine standing by one of those large, open-air vats on a hot summer day in, say, coastal Spain or North Africa. The sun beats down directly onto the surface of the fish and salt mixture. This isn't just passive heating, it's a deliberate part of the process. The heat from the sun penetrates the upper layers of the mixture and warms the entire vat, raising the temperature of the fish and brine within. And as the temperature rises, the enzymes become more active. This is a mainstream historical fact. The locations of major garum production sites in sunny, warm climates, and the open-air design of the vats clearly indicate that solar heat was intentionally harnessed to accelerate and improve the fermentation process. It's nature doing the work, guided by Roman ingenuity. Think about it like cooking, but instead of a quick burst of high heat, it's a slow, steady, low-temperature bake over weeks or months. Warmer temperatures mean the proteases and lipases in the fish guts break down proteins and fats faster. This speeds up the release of those delicious amino acids and fatty acids, shortening the overall fermentation time and potentially influencing the final flavor profile. A batch of garum started in the heat of summer might be ready much sooner than one started in the cooler months. The sun provided the energy needed to drive this complex biochemical reaction at an industrial scale. It was essentially free, abundant power, perfectly suited for a process that required sustained, gentle heat. The design of the vats, often dug into the ground or partially buried, might have also helped regulate temperature, preventing the mixture from getting too hot during the peak of the day and retaining some warmth overnight. But the primary driver of the enzymatic speed was that direct solar exposure. You can almost see the heat waves shimmering above the vats on a particularly scorching day, a visual representation of the energy being transferred into the fermenting fish. You might even feel the warmth radiating off the concrete walls of the vats if you got close enough, though, given the smell, you might not want to linger. This reliance on solar power meant that garum production was often most active and efficient during the warmer seasons. While fermentation could still occur in cooler temperatures, it would be much slower. This might explain why some regions were more famous for garum production than others. Places like Hispania Baetica, known for its abundant sunshine and excellent fishing grounds, became synonymous with high-quality garum. The combination of the right fish, ample salt, and consistent solar heat was the winning formula. Imagine trying to make industrial quantities of garum in, say, rainy Britain without supplemental heating. You'd be waiting a very, very long time for those enzymes to get motivated. They were basically solar-powered flavor factories. A slightly quirkier tidbit related to the sun's role might be the potential impact of daily temperature fluctuations. While the sun provided overall warmth, temperatures would drop at night. Historians still argue whether these daily cycles of heating and cooling influenced the fermentation process in specific ways, perhaps affecting the types of microbes that thrived or the rate at which different compounds were produced. Did the Romans notice subtle differences in the final product based on how consistent the weather was during fermentation? Did they perhaps try to cover the vats at night in cooler seasons to retain heat? We don't have detailed records of such micromanagement, but it's fascinating to consider how these natural daily rhythms might have played a part in the complex chemistry within the vat. Maybe some batches had a bit more night chill character than others. The constant exposure to the sun also meant the vats were open to the elements, primarily the air. While the high salt concentration prevented general decay, the interaction with the air likely played a role, perhaps introducing certain salt-tolerant microorganisms or allowing volatile compounds produced during fermentation to dissipate, or concentrate, depending on the compound and the wind. The sun facilitated the main enzymatic breakdown, But the air exposure was another uncontrolled variable in this ancient biological experiment. Think about the conditions for the workers tending these vats. Standing out in the open sun all day, surrounded by the intense aroma of fermenting fish, would have been incredibly challenging. Add the physical labor of stirring, which we'll get to, and handling the raw materials, and you have a job that required serious stamina and a tolerance for unpleasant sensory input. Forget air conditioning, you were lucky if you got a bit of shade from a nearby wall or shed. It makes complaining about your air-conditioned office job feel a little silly, doesn't it? Oh, it's too cold in here. Meanwhile, Roman garum workers are sweating under the Mediterranean sun, elbow-deep in salty fish guts. The sun's heat also likely influenced the rate at which the brine formed and concentrated as water evaporated from the surface of the vats. This evaporation would increase the salinity of the remaining liquid, further regulating the enzymatic activity. It was a dynamic system, with the sun acting as the primary energy input, driving the enzymatic reactions and influencing the brine concentration. It's a testament to the Romans' ability to work with nature, leveraging environmental conditions to achieve their production goals, even if those goals involved producing something eye-wateringly pungent. The sheer scale of the vats meant they absorbed a significant amount of solar energy, acting like giant solar collectors. This allowed for large-scale production that wasn't dependent on fuel sources for heating, making it economically viable to produce garum in vast quantities. The sun provided the necessary warmth for free, a crucial factor in making garum accessible across the empire, not just a luxury for the ultra-rich. It was a truly sustainable energy source for their flavor industry. So, while the fish provided the enzymes and the salt provided the control, the sun provided the power. It was the engine driving the biological transformation within the vats, speeding up the enzymatic breakdown and influencing the overall pace and potentially the character of the fermentation. The Romans didn't just build their factories by the sea for the fish. They built them in sunny locations and designed them with open vats to deliberately capture that solar energy. It was a fundamental, indispensable part of their very particular method for making the perfect garum sauce, turning sunlight into savory flavor. And it makes you appreciate your oven, or even just your microwave, a little more, knowing the ancient reliance on nature's slower, smellier heating methods. With the enzymes working and the sun providing the heat, the process was well underway. But it wasn't entirely hands-off. The mixture needed a little help to ensure consistent fermentation from top to bottom. It was time for the daily grind of stirring. The enzymes are doing their stinky, essential work within the vats, fueled by the sun's warmth, silently breaking down the fish. But even with those tireless microscopic workers and the free solar energy, the process wasn't entirely hands-off. The mixture needed a little help to ensure that transformation happened consistently from the top layers right down to the bottom. It was time for the daily grind, the manual labor that ensured a perfect, even fermentation, stirring. Imagine the scene in the garum factory courtyard. The sun is high, the air is thick with that evolving, pungent aroma, and laborers are approaching the vats armed with long poles. This is a mainstream historical fact. Stirring the mixture in the fermentation vats was a regular, often daily, task in Roman garum production. It wasn't just a casual poke. It was a deliberate, necessary step to manage the complex process happening inside. You're standing there, maybe wiping sweat from your brow, watching as a worker braces themselves and plunges a long, sturdy pole into the thick, mushy contents of a vat. Why stir? Several reasons, all crucial for producing high-quality garum. Firstly, the mixture of fish and salt, especially in the early stages, could settle unevenly. Solids might compact at the bottom, while liquid brine collected on top. Stirring helped to redistribute the fish material and the salt evenly throughout the vat. This ensured that all parts of the fish were in contact with the high salinity brine and the active enzymes, preventing dry spots or areas where spoilage bacteria might gain a foothold. It was like ensuring every single piece of fish got the memo about the fermentation party happening. Secondly, stirring helped to distribute the heat absorbed from the sun. While the sun warmed the top layers directly, stirring brought the warmer material from the surface down into the cooler depths of the vat and vice versa. This created a more consistent temperature throughout the mixture, ensuring the enzymes could work efficiently and at a similar rate everywhere. Without stirring, you might end up with faster fermentation at the top and much slower breakdown at the bottom, leading to an uneven and potentially lower quality product. It was literally stirring the sunshine throughout the stinky soup. Thirdly, stirring likely helped to release gases produced during the initial stages of fermentation. While the high salt concentration inhibited many gas-producing bacteria, some activity was inevitable. Stirring would allow these gases to escape, preventing pressure buildup and potentially helping to aerate the mixture slightly, which could influence the microbial balance, though the process is primarily enzymatic, not bacterial fermentation in the way we think of yogurt or sauerkraut. It was probably a good idea to stand upwind when they did this. The tools used for stirring were likely simple but robust. Long, wooden poles or paddles seemed the most probable implements, strong enough to push through the dense, sometimes viscous mixture. Imagine the effort required, pushing and pulling a heavy pole through tons of semi-liquid, solid-laced fish mash, day after day. This wasn't a quick whisk, it was a serious workout, requiring strength and stamina. You can picture the muscles straining, the sweat dripping, and the constant, unavoidable smell clinging to everything and everyone. Historians still argue whether there were specific, standardized stirring techniques or tools used across the Roman world, or if practices varied regionally based on local traditions and the type of garum being produced. Did the factories in Spain use different poles than those in North Africa? Was there a specific pattern or duration for stirring that was considered best practice for garum sociorum? We don't have detailed manuals describing the proper Roman garum stirring technique, so some of the specifics remain a matter of educated guesswork based on archaeological finds and scattered textual references. A slightly quirkier tidbit about this daily grind is the sheer, inescapable smell. Workers who spent their days stirring garum vats would have been absolutely permeated by the aroma. Their clothes, their skin, their hair, everything would have carried the powerful scent of fermenting fish. You wouldn't need a name tag to identify a garum factory worker, you just need a nose. Imagine trying to go home at the end of the day and explaining to your family why you smelled quite so distinctive. "Honey, I'm home. And I brought the scent of 1,000 decomposing fish with me." You probably wouldn't be getting many hugs. Forget designer perfume. The ultimate Roman accessory for a garum worker was the permanent aura of pungent fermentation. The frequency of stirring was also important. While some sources suggest daily stirring, it might have varied depending on the stage of fermentation, the temperature, and the specific type of garum. In the hotter months, when enzymatic activity was faster, more frequent stirring might have been necessary to manage the process and distribute heat. In cooler periods, less frequent stirring might suffice. It required skilled workers or foremen who could judge the state of the mixture by its appearance, texture, and perhaps even its evolving smell, knowing when it needed another vigorous churn. Think about the sensory experience. The squelching sound as the pole pushed through the thick mash. The visual of the dark, murky liquid churning, perhaps with bits of bone or scale momentarily surfacing. And always, the overwhelming, intense smell, which would likely intensify as the stirring released volatile compounds into the air. It was a visceral, demanding task, far removed from the clean, automated processes of modern food production. This was food made with brute force and biological patience. This regular stirring wasn't just manual labor. It was an integral part of the chemical and biological process. It ensured that the salt remained adequately mixed, that the enzymes had access to fresh substrate, and that the heat from the sun was utilized effectively. It was the human intervention that guided the natural transformation, preventing potential problems and helping to ensure a consistent, high-quality product. It shows that while the Romans harnessed natural forces like enzymes and solar heat, they also understood the need for active management and physical effort to achieve their desired outcome. It's also worth noting that this was likely one of the less desirable jobs in the garum factory. While some roles, like managing the filtering or distribution, might have been less physically demanding or less smelly, the stirring was undeniably hard, dirty, and pungent work. It was likely performed by the lowest paid laborers or slaves, a testament to the less glamorous side of producing Rome's favorite condiment. You wouldn't be signing up for the garum stirring internship unless you were truly desperate. So, the daily grind of stirring was far more than just mixing. It was a critical step in ensuring even fermentation, consistent temperature, and proper contact between ingredients. It was a physically demanding, sensorily challenging task performed by dedicated laborers, guided by generations of empirical knowledge about what it took to turn fish and salt into that prized liquid flavor. It was the messy, hands-on reality of harnessing biological processes on an industrial scale, proving that even with the magic of enzymes and the power of the sun, sometimes you just need a long pole and a strong arm to make the perfect garum sauce. And it makes you wonder what kind of ancient air fresheners they might have invented to combat the smell. With the stirring ensuring even fermentation, the mixture is steadily transforming. But how did they know when it was ready? One major clue wasn't something you could see or taste within the vat, but something that announced itself to the entire neighborhood, the smell that announced arrival. You've layered the fish in salt, set the enzymes to work, and the sun is providing the crucial warmth, aided by that daily, back-breaking stirring. Inside the vats, a complex biological transformation is well underway, changing the very structure of the fish. But how did anyone outside the factory know this was happening? How did the world announce that tons of perishable fish were being turned into liquid flavor? Well, you didn't need a signpost. You didn't need to check a production schedule. You just needed to follow your nose. The smell announced arrival. The olfactory reality of Roman garum production sites was, to put it mildly, intense. This wasn't just a faint whiff of the sea. This was the concentrated aroma of fish undergoing enzymatic breakdown in a warm, salty environment, day after day, week after week, sometimes for months. It was a powerful, pervasive scent that would hang heavy in the air, particularly around the factories located in coastal areas, where the sea breezes might carry it for considerable distances. Imagine approaching a town like Belo Claudia in southern Spain, famous for its garum. Long before you saw the distinctive red-tiled roofs or the theater, you would catch that unmistakable aroma, a pungent blend of fish, salt, and deep fermentation. It was the smell of industry, the scent of a major economic enterprise, and the daily reality for anyone living or working nearby. This wasn't necessarily a smell that Romans universally perceived as unpleasant. While some ancient writers did comment on the strength of the odor, it was associated with a valuable, even luxurious product. For many, that smell would have been linked to trade, employment, and the availability of their favorite condiment. It was the smell of money, in a sense, and the smell of flavor. Think of how we react to the smell of a bakery or a coffee roaster, potent, pervasive, but often perceived positively because of the desirable product it signifies. Garum's smell was probably similar for many Romans, a powerful sensory cue associated with something they craved. Though let's be honest, it was probably a bit much, even for them. You might wrinkle your nose, but you knew what it meant. Garum was being made, and soon it would be ready. Historians still argue whether the intensity or specific nuances of the smell could indicate the quality or stage of the fermentation process. Did experienced garum producers have noses refined enough to discern subtle differences in the aroma that told them a batch was progressing well, or if something was going wrong? Could they tell just by sniffing the air if a vat needed more stirring, or if it was nearing completion? It's plausible that empirical knowledge passed down through generations included recognizing these olfactory cues. The smell wasn't just a byproduct, it might have been an important, albeit unscientific, monitoring tool. Imagine a foreman taking a deep sniff of the air and declaring, "Ah yes, the umami is reaching peak pungency today. Almost ready!" This brings us to a slightly quirkier tidbit. Given the undeniable strength of the smell, it's been speculated that Romans might have employed methods to try and mitigate it, especially in areas closer to residential zones or public buildings. While there's no extensive record of ancient air fresheners specifically for garum factories, Romans were known for using perfumes, incense, and aromatic plants. Perhaps workers chewed strongly scented herbs, or perhaps aromatic plants were grown around the factory perimeters. Or maybe they just accepted it as the cost of doing business. "Yes, darling, the house smells faintly of fermented fish today." Just another Tuesday. It's fun to imagine them trying to mask it with lavender or roses, a truly epic battle of aromas. Honey, can you smell the garum? Just barely, dear, the jasmine is fighting bravely today. The sheer scale of production meant the smell wasn't confined to the factory walls. With dozens or hundreds of vats bubbling away in the sun, the combined aroma would have been immense. This is a mainstream historical fact. The location of garum factories, often on the outskirts of towns or downwind of prevailing breezes, suggests that while the smell was tolerated, its intensity was recognized and potentially managed by urban planners. You didn't build a garum factory right next to the emperor's palace if you wanted to stay in his good graces. You put it where the smell wouldn't offend the most powerful noses, or at least where the economic benefits outweighed the olfactory nuisance. It was a smell that defined the landscape, a constant reminder of the industry that supported the community. Think about the workers themselves. Their clothes, their hair, their skin, everything would have absorbed that potent aroma. It wasn't just a smell you encountered, it was a smell that became a part of you. Imagine trying to get a date after a long day stirring the vats. So, you smell interesting. Been working hard? It makes you appreciate modern laundry detergent and ventilation systems in ways you never thought possible. For them, it was just the smell of their livelihood, as familiar as the smell of sweat or dust. It was the scent of their daily bread, even if that bread was often dipped in pungent fish sauce. The smell also served a practical purpose beyond potentially indicating readiness. It was a clear marker of the factory's activity. If the smell was strong and consistent, you knew production was in full swing. If it faded, perhaps operations had paused, or a batch was finished and the vats were awaiting refilling. For traders and merchants, the smell was an advertisement, a signal that valuable cargo was being produced and would soon be available for transport and sale. It was a sensory billboard, announcing to the world, "We are making garum here! Come buy our stinky sauce!" The intensity of the smell would have varied depending on the wind direction, the temperature, the stage of fermentation, and the size of the operation. On a hot, still day, it might have been almost suffocatingly strong right next to the vats. On a breezy day, it could spread far and wide, a cloud of fermented fish scent drifting over the landscape. It was a smell that could dominate the sensory environment, drowning out other aromas, a powerful testament to the biological forces at work. Imagine trying to have a picnic downwind of a garum factory. Your sandwiches would probably end up tasting faintly of fermented fish, no matter how tightly you wrap them. This pervasive smell was an unavoidable consequence of the production method. Unlike modern food processing, which often takes place in sealed, climate-controlled environments with sophisticated odor filtration, Roman garum production was an open-air, sun-powered process. The vats were open to the sky, the stirring released volatile compounds into the air, and the sheer volume of fermenting material meant the smell was simply part of the package. It was a trade-off: harness natural processes for large-scale production, accept the intense olfactory signature. So, the smell wasn't just an unpleasant side effect, it was an integral part of the garum story. It was the factory's announcement to the world, a potential indicator of the process's progress, a defining characteristic of the lives of the workers, and a constant, powerful presence in the landscape around production sites. It was the smell of Roman industry, the scent of their culinary obsession, and a sensory reality that would have been impossible to ignore. It was the smell that announced arrival, both for visitors approaching a garum town and for the sauce itself nearing its final, liquid form. And once that powerful aroma had indicated readiness, the next crucial step was to separate the liquid gold from the remaining fishy mash. It was time for the crucial process of filtering the finished sauce. You've felt the heat, smelled the transformative aroma, and pictured the daily grind of stirring. For weeks, perhaps even months, that pungent mixture of fish and salt has been bubbling away under the Roman sun, the enzymes doing their tireless work. The smell, which you now know announces arrival, has reached its peak intensity, a sign that the biological alchemy is nearing completion. The solid fish material you layered so carefully has mostly broken down into a thick, mushy mash, and a liquid, often amber or reddish-brown, has started to pool, separating from the solids. This liquid is the prize, the liquid gold the Romans craved. But how do you get it out of that massive, smelly vat without scooping up all the fishy sludge? This is where the crucial process of filtering the finished sauce comes in, the step that separates the precious garum from the remaining piscine pulp. Think about separating juice from fruit pulp after blending. You strain it, right? The Romans did something similar, but on an industrial scale, and with significantly smellier ingredients. This is a mainstream historical fact. The final stage of garum production involves straining or filtering the fermented mixture to extract the liquid garum. It wasn't a single, simple step, and the method could influence the quality and type of sauce produced. The most common method, particularly for obtaining the highest grades of garum, involved using the vat itself. Remember those sloping floors and collection basins we talked about in Section 5? They were designed for this moment. Once the fermentation was deemed complete, perhaps judged by the smell, the appearance of the liquid, or simply the passage of the required time, workers would open a plug or a tap at the lowest point of the vat. The clear, or relatively clear, liquid garum, which had risen or settled to the bottom depending on its density and the vat design, would flow out into collection vessels. This initial liquid, often called garum floss, flour of garum, or liquamen primum, first liquid, was considered the highest quality, purest sauce. It was the equivalent of the extra virgin olive oil of the garum world. For less liquid or thicker mixtures, or to extract more sauce after the initial free draining, they might use more direct filtering methods. This involved scooping the fermented mash into large baskets or cloth bags and allowing the liquid to drain through. Sometimes, weights might be placed on top of the baskets or bags to press out more liquid, a process akin to pressing grapes for wine or olives for oil. Imagine the scene: laborers shoveling the dark, pungent mash into coarse woven baskets, the thick, salty liquids slowly dripping out into amphorae or collection tanks below. The solid residue left behind in the baskets was not wasted. It was the basis for a cheaper, paste-like product called alec. Waste not, want not, especially not in the efficient Roman economy. This process of filtering wasn't just about separation. It was also about classification. The first liquid to drain freely from the vat was the most prized, pure, clear, and intensely flavored. Subsequent pressings or filterings might yield a less refined sauce, perhaps cloudier or with more sediment, which would be sold at a lower price. The alec, the solid residue, was the cheapest product, a strong, salty paste used by the poorest Romans or as animal feed. This tiered system of products, all derived from the same initial vat, reflects the Roman understanding that different levels of refinement produce different qualities and values of garum. Historians still argue whether the specific filtering techniques, such as the pressure applied during pressing or the fineness of the filtering material, were standardized across the empire or varied significantly between factories, influencing the unique characteristics of regional garum brands. Did the famed garum sociorum from Spain have a particular pressing method that contributed to its renown? Were there specific types of cloth or basket weaves preferred in different regions? Without detailed ancient manuals, these specifics remain subjects of scholarly debate and speculation, pieced together from archaeological evidence and scattered textual references. A slightly quirkier tidbit related to filtering involves the potential use of additional flavorings or clarifying agents during this stage. Some ancient recipes or descriptions hint at the addition of things like wine, vinegar, or even aromatic herbs after the initial fermentation but before or during filtering. While the core process was fish, salt, sun, and thyme, these additions could have been used to subtly alter the flavor profile, improve clarity, or perhaps even act as secondary preservatives. Imagine adding a splash of aged Roman wine to the dripping garum as it filtered through a basket, hoping to infuse it with a hint of sophistication. Whether this was a common practice or a rare refinement for specialty batches is another layer of mystery in the garum production story. The filtering process was likely still a very smelly affair. While the initial, most volatile fermentation smells might have peaked earlier, the act of disturbing and pressing the fishy mash would undoubtedly release a fresh wave of pungent aromas. The liquid garum itself, even the highest quality, had a strong, distinct smell, intensely savory, fishy, and salty. Imagine the air around the filtering area, thick with the scent of concentrated fish sauce, a perfume only a Roman garum connoisseur could truly appreciate. It makes you thankful for modern ventilation systems and packaging that contains those powerful aromas. The collection vessels themselves were important. The liquid garum was typically collected in large ceramic jars, *dolia*, before being transferred into the familiar amphorae for storage and transport. These dolia would also be sealed to prevent spoilage and maintain quality. The smooth, non-reactive surface of the ceramic was ideal for holding the corrosive, salty garum. You can picture rows of these large jars, slowly filling with the amber liquid flowing from the vats or dripping from the filtering baskets, each one representing weeks or months of dedicated, smelly work. The speed of filtering would depend on the consistency of the mash, the size of the vat, and the method used. Free draining from a well-fermented batch in a sloped vat might be relatively quick. Pressing a thicker mash through baskets would be slower, more labor-intensive work. It required patience and attention to detail to ensure as much valuable liquid was extracted as possible without forcing too much solid sediment through, which would lower the quality of the resulting sauce. It was a delicate balance between extraction efficiency and product purity. Think about the final yield. Tons of raw fish and salt went into those vats, but the final product, the liquid garum, was a concentrated essence. The volume of liquid garum would be significantly less than the initial volume of raw materials. This concentration is what made it so valuable and potent. It was a process of reducing bulk while intensifying flavor, turning perishable raw material into a stable, high-value commodity that could be traded across the vast Roman Empire. It was the culmination of the entire process, the moment when the messy, stinky transformation yielded its prized, liquid result. So, the filtering process was the final, crucial step in transforming the fermented mash into the liquid gold of Roman cuisine. It was a practical, multi-stage process involving both the vat's design and potentially manual methods like straining and pressing. It produced not one, but several grades of product, catering to different markets and prices, and leaving behind a residue that was also put to use. It was the messy, smelly, but essential separation that yielded the intensely savory, salty sauce that powered the Roman palate, ready now to be packaged and sent out into the world. And speaking of packaging, the next step involved getting this precious, pungent liquid into containers that could travel across the empire, the amphorae and ancient distribution networks. You've seen how the Romans carefully layered the fish and salt, how the sun provided the heat, how the enzymes did their stinky work, and how the daily stirring kept it all moving. And you've just learned how they meticulously filtered the resulting mash, separating the prized liquid from the solids. But here's the thing, that filtering process, and indeed the ingredients and methods that came before it, didn't produce a single, uniform product. Oh no. Just like modern olive oils or wines, there was a distinct hierarchy of Roman fish sauces. Not all garum was equal. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Roman world recognized and traded various grades of fish sauce, ranging from incredibly expensive, high-status products to cheaper, more common condiments. The name garum itself was sometimes used broadly, but often specific terms distinguished different qualities, ingredients, and even regional origins. Think of it less as just fish sauce, and more like a spectrum, from gourmet delicacy to everyday staple. At the very top of this pungent pyramid sat the legendary Garum Sociorum. This was the creme de la creme, the vintage champagne of Roman fish sauces. It was primarily made from specific types of oily fish, particularly mackerel and tuna, sourced from the rich fishing grounds off the coast of Hispania Baetica, modern Andalusia in Spain. Its high quality was attributed to the freshness of the fish, the specific parts used, often including blood and viscera, potentially a precise salt-to-fish ratio, the warm climate for optimal fermentation, and careful filtering. Garum Sociorum was incredibly expensive, a luxury item enjoyed by the wealthy elite and used sparingly in the finest Roman kitchens. Imagine paying the equivalent of a month's wages for a small jar of fish sauce. It puts your grocery bill into perspective, doesn't it? This stuff was serious business, a symbol of status and refined taste. Below Garum sociorum were other grades, often referred to more generally as liquamen. This term could apply to a wide range of fish sauces, varying in quality based on the type of fish used: sardines, anchovies, sprats, or even mixed scraps, the proportions of flesh to guts, the salt concentration, and the refinement of the filtering process. A liquamen made from whole, small oily fish might be quite good, while one made from leftover trimmings would be less so. These were the workhorse sauces, used in everyday cooking across the social spectrum, the ancient Roman equivalent of table salt or standard cooking oil. You'd find liquamen in military rations, in the kitchens of ordinary homes, and in the bustling street food stalls. Remember the filtering process we just discussed? That was key to creating these different grades. The first liquid to drain freely from the vat, clear and potent, yielded the highest quality garum or liquamen. Subsequent pressings of the solid residue produced lower grades, which might be cloudier, thicker, and perhaps harsher in flavor due to the inclusion of more sediment. And then there was alec. This wasn't a liquid sauce at all, but a thick paste made from the solid residue left behind after the garum and liquamen had been filtered and pressed out. It contained bones, scales, undigested material, and the remaining fish solids, all mixed with salt. Think of it as the fishy equivalent of spent grain from brewing beer or pomace from olive pressing, the valuable leftovers. Alec was the cheapest product of the garum factory, a strong, intensely salty paste. It was used by the poor to flavor their simple meals, as a cheap source of protein and salt, or even as animal feed. While it lacked the refined texture and clarity of true garum, it still provided that essential salty, umami hit. You wouldn't drizzle alec over a dish, you'd likely stir it into porridge or stew to add flavor. It was the ultimate expression of Roman efficiency, using every single part of the fish. Historians still argue whether the specific names and classifications for garum grades were universally understood and applied across the vast Roman Empire, or if there was significant regional variation in terminology and quality standards. Did a Roman in Britannia buying liquamen know exactly what they were getting compared to someone buying the same term in Egypt? It's likely there was some degree of standardization for major trade products like garum sociorum, but local markets probably had their own nuances and naming conventions based on what was produced locally. A slightly quirkier tidbit about the hierarchy is the potential for adulteration or imitation. Because the highest grades like Garum sociorum were so valuable, there were undoubtedly attempts to produce cheaper imitations or to cut higher quality sauces with lower grades. Ancient texts mention techniques for improving the color or clarity of lower grade garum, perhaps to pass it off as something better. It suggests that even in the ancient world, food fraud was a concern when dealing with highly prized commodities. Imagine a Roman food inspector trying to determine if a batch of garum was truly sociorum, or just some cleverly filtered alec residue. They probably didn't have chemical analysis tools, so maybe it came down to a highly trained nose and palate, the ultimate taste test for authenticity. Yes, definitely detect notes of genuine Spanish mackerel, and not a hint of desperation and fish bone paste. Approved! The existence of this hierarchy meant that garum was accessible to almost everyone in Roman society, albeit in different forms and qualities. The wealthy could afford the liquid gold, while the poor could still get a flavor boost from the salty paste. This widespread availability reinforced its fundamental role in Roman cuisine, ensuring that the characteristic umami flavor was a common thread across different social classes and geographical regions. It wasn't just a condiment for the elite, it was the flavor of the empire. Think about the journey from raw fish guts and salt to these distinct products. It involved careful selection of ingredients, precise, or empirically determined, ratios, controlled fermentation, aided by sun and stirring, and meticulous filtering. Each step influenced the final outcome, determining whether a batch would yield precious garum sociorum, everyday liquamen, or humble alec. It was a process that demanded knowledge, skill, and a tolerance for the pungent realities of fermentation. So, while the image of garum as simply fermented fish sauce is accurate, understanding that there were multiple grades, from the almost clear, intensely savory liquid gold to the thick, salty paste of alec, adds a crucial layer of detail. It shows that the Romans weren't just making one thing, they were producing a range of products from the same basic process, catering to different tastes, budgets, and uses across their vast empire. It was a sophisticated system of production and classification, all centered around harnessing the power of enzymes and salt to create that indispensable umami hit. And once these different grades were filtered and ready, they needed to be packaged and sent out into the world, a journey that relied on those iconic Roman containers, the amphorae and ancient distribution networks. You've filtered the glorious liquid from the pungent mash, separating the high-grade garum sociorum from the everyday liquamen and the humble alec. You've got your different qualities of salty, savory sauce, ready to bring that essential umami hit to Roman tables. But these large vats weren't where the garum stayed. It needed to travel, often vast distances, from the coastal factories where it was made to the far-flung corners of the empire where it was consumed. And for that, you needed the right packaging and a sophisticated distribution network. Enter the unsung hero of Roman trade, the iconic ceramic vessel you've probably seen pictures of, the amphora. This is a mainstream historical fact. Amphorae were the standard containers for transporting liquid commodities like wine, olive oil, and crucially, garum across the Roman world. These large, two-handled clay jars, typically with a pointed base, were perfectly designed for the job. The pointed base allowed them to be stacked upright in soft ground or sand, and also packed tightly together in the holds of ships, leaning against each other without wasted space. They were relatively sturdy, though prone to breaking in transit, as many shipwrecks attest, cheap to produce in large quantities, and when properly sealed, could keep the contents safe and stable during long journeys. Imagine the garum, finally free from the open vat, being poured into these distinctive, clay bottles, ready for its grand tour of the empire. Once the garum was filtered, it would be transferred from the large collection dolia into these transport amphorae. Each amphora would hold a significant volume, perhaps 20 to 30 liters or more. Filling them was another labor-intensive step. You'd be carefully pouring the valuable liquid, making sure not to spill a drop of that precious, pungent sauce. Once filled, the amphorae were sealed, typically with a ceramic plug or a cork stopper, often covered with pitch or clay and sometimes stamped with a seal to indicate the origin, producer, or content. This sealing was vital to prevent spoilage and leakage during transit. Imagine the careful work, tapping the stopper in tight, smoothing the clay, ensuring that precious cargo was secure for its journey over land and sea. The sheer scale of garum production meant that vast numbers of amphorae were needed constantly. Garum factories often had their own pottery workshops nearby, or close relationships with potters, to ensure a steady supply of these essential containers. Archaeological sites near major garum production centers are often littered with fragments of amphorae, testaments to the intensive packaging activity that took place there. You could probably piece together a complete amphora just from the shards lying around a Roman garum factory site, like a giant, stinky puzzle. With the garum sealed in its amphorae, the distribution network kicked into gear. From the coastal factories in places like Baetica, Lusitania, North Africa, and the Black Sea, the amphorae were loaded onto ships. Maritime trade was the most efficient way to transport large volumes of goods across the Mediterranean and beyond. Roman merchant ships, some surprisingly large, crisscrossed the sea lanes, carrying garum along with grain, wine, oil, and other commodities. Imagine the docks, bustling with activity, laborers heaving those heavy, awkward amphorae onto waiting ships, the air filled with the sounds of shouting, creaking wood, and the ever-present, though perhaps slightly fainter now, smell of garum emanating from the sealed vessels. But distribution wasn't just by sea. Garum also traveled inland along the famous Roman roads. Amphorae would be transferred from ships to carts or wagons, pulled by oxen or mules, and transported to inland cities, military camps, and villas. While land transport was more expensive and slower than sea travel, it was essential for reaching areas not directly on the coast or navigable rivers. Imagine a long train of wagons rumbling down a dusty Roman road, each carrying dozens of amphorae of garum, bouncing along towards some distant market or hungry legionary camp. The distinctive shape of the amphora made it recognizable cargo, a sign of Roman trade and connectivity. This brings us to a slightly quirkier tidbit about the amphorae themselves. Many garum amphorae have been found with painted or inscribed labels, known as tituli picti. These labels could indicate the type of garum, e.g., garum sociorum, the producer, the place of origin, the weight, and sometimes even the name of the merchant or the destination. These tituli picti are invaluable sources for historians, providing direct evidence of the trade routes, the different grades of garum being shipped, and the individuals involved in the business. Imagine archaeologists finding an amphora at a site in Britain and reading a label that says, "Finest macro garum from Baetica, shipped by Marcus," connecting that far-flung outpost directly to a specific factory and merchant in Spain 2,000 years ago. It's like finding a shipping label from ancient times, detailing the journey of that particular batch of stinky sauce. Historians still argue whether the Roman state played a direct role in regulating the garum trade and distribution, or if it was primarily driven by private enterprise and market forces. While the state certainly benefited from taxes on trade and ensured the security of trade routes, the extent to which it controlled production standards, pricing, or distribution networks for commodities like garum is debated. Were there imperial inspectors ensuring the quality of garum sociorum being shipped, or was it left mostly to the reputation of individual producers and merchants? It's likely a mix, with state involvement in infrastructure and security, but private initiative driving much of the actual commerce. The widespread distribution of garum is evidenced by archaeological finds across the entire empire, from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to the eastern Mediterranean. Amphorae fragments with distinctive shapes associated with garum production sites have been found far from their origin, silent witnesses to the vast trade network that supplied the Roman world with its favorite condiment. Roman shipwrecks often contain large cargoes of garum amphorae, providing a snapshot of a single consignment being transported across the sea. These underwater treasures offer incredible insights into the scale and logistics of the ancient garum trade. Imagine divers discovering a wreck on the seabed, and among the scattered remains, finding dozens of perfectly preserved garum amphorae, still sealed, still containing the remnants of that ancient sauce. Talk about a historical discovery with a unique aroma. The life cycle of a garum amphora didn't always end after its contents were consumed. While many were simply broken and discarded, creating those massive piles of shards at consumption sites, some were reused. Amphorae might be refilled with other liquids, or even used as building materials, incorporated into walls or foundations. The Monte Testaccio in Rome, a massive hill made almost entirely of broken amphorae, is a testament to the sheer volume of liquid goods, including garum, that flowed into the capital over centuries. It's a mountain of ancient packaging, a monument to Roman consumption on an epic scale. The scale of the garum trade was immense. It was a major economic driver for coastal regions, supporting industries from fishing and salt production to pottery making and shipping. The profits generated from the sale of high-quality garum could be substantial, contributing to the wealth of merchants, factory owners, and potentially the Roman state through taxation. Garum was more than just a food item. It was a key commodity in the complex web of Roman trade, connecting distant provinces and fueling the Roman economy. It makes you look at those pictures of Roman ruins a little differently, knowing that the wealth that built those temples and theaters might have, in part, been generated by the sale of stinky fish sauce. So, once the garum was filtered and ready, it embarked on a journey that took it from the sun-drenched vats of coastal factories to dinner tables across the vast Roman Empire. Packaged in those distinctive amphorae, it traveled by sea and land, a vital part of the Roman trade network, a valuable commodity that fueled both the Roman palate and the Roman economy. It was a testament to Roman logistics and organization, taking a perishable product made through a rather smelly process and distributing it far and wide, ensuring that Romans everywhere could enjoy that essential, savory flavor. And that journey, from vat to amphora to distant province, is just one example of how garum was integrated into so many aspects of Roman life, proving it was far more than just a condiment. You've followed the garum's journey from the stinky vats, sealed in its amphora, traveling across the vast Roman world. It's arrived at its destination, a busy Roman city, a military outpost, a wealthy villa, or a humble home. But when that amphora is unsealed, its pungent contents aren't just splashed on food like a modern dash of hot sauce. Oh no. Garum was far, far more than just a condiment to the Romans. It was woven into the very fabric of their society, used in ways that might surprise you. Think about your pantry today. You have condiments for flavor, yes, but you also have cooking oils, stocks, nutritional supplements, perhaps even some old home remedies your grandma swore by. Garum, in its various forms, touched upon all these categories. It wasn't just something you added at the table. It was an essential ingredient in the cooking process itself. Roman cookbooks like Apicius are filled with recipes that call for garum, using it as a base for sauces, a flavor enhancer for stews, a seasoning for vegetables, and even mixed into desserts. Yes, really, sometimes with honey. Don't knock it till you've, well, actually, maybe do knock it. This is a mainstream historical fact. Garum was a fundamental cooking ingredient, integrated into countless Roman dishes across all social classes. You couldn't really cook Roman without it. Beyond the kitchen, garum had surprising applications. Remember that deep, salty, umami flavor? It wasn't just tasty, it was packed with protein, salt, and minerals. In a world where diets could be monotonous and nutrient deficiencies were a real threat, garum provided a vital nutritional boost. Soldiers on campaign carried it with them, using it to make bland grain porridges palatable and nutritious. Laborers added it to their simple meals for energy and flavor. It was a concentrated source of calories and essential salts, especially crucial in hot climates where people lost a lot of electrolytes through sweat. Think of it as an ancient Roman energy drink, but in fish sauce form. Probably wouldn't be featured in a modern Super Bowl ad, though. Feeling sluggish? Try garum. Sound of violent retching, garum. Get yours today. And then there were the medicinal uses. While modern science views this with considerable skepticism, ancient Roman writers like Pliny the Elder and Dioscorides described garum being used to treat a variety of ailments. We touched on this briefly before, but it's worth revisiting the sheer breadth of claimed benefits. It was recommended for digestive issues, such as dysentery and constipation. It was applied externally to treat skin conditions, wounds, and even dog bites. It was used in remedies for earaches and other minor complaints. A slightly quirkier tidbit is the suggestion that gargling with garum could help with sore throats or mouth ulcers. Imagine that burning, salty, fishy rinse. You might forget about the sore throat because you'd be too distracted by the taste. Doctor, my throat is killing me. Ah, yes, I have just the thing. A nice warm mug of garum. Swallow it down. You'd probably opt for the sore throat. Historians still argue whether these medicinal applications were based on any genuine therapeutic properties. Perhaps the salt had antiseptic qualities, or the nutrients aided recovery, or if they were simply part of ancient folk medicine and belief systems, attributing healing powers to valuable or widely available substances. Was there any real efficacy, or was it just the placebo effect amplified by the strong taste and association with a potent, valuable product? It's hard to say definitively, but the belief in its medicinal value undoubtedly contributed to its high regard and widespread use. Garum also found its way into less obvious places. Some sources suggest it could be used in cosmetic preparations, perhaps as an exfoliant due to the salt or for perceived benefits to the skin, although details are scarce. It was used in religious rituals, sometimes offered to the gods. And the waste products from garum production, particularly the alec paste, could be used as animal feed or even fertilizer, ensuring that absolutely nothing from the process was wasted. The Roman economy was remarkably efficient in utilizing resources, and the garum industry was a prime example, turning fish scraps into a cascade of valuable products, from luxury sauce to agricultural input. The versatility of garum meant that it was consumed in many different ways. It wasn't always used straight. It was frequently mixed with other ingredients to create complex sauces and flavorings. Inogarum was garum mixed with wine. Oxygarum was garum mixed with vinegar. Hydrogarum was garum mixed with water, a cheaper, less intense version for those who couldn't afford the pure sauce or found its strength overwhelming. These mixtures allowed Romans to tailor the flavor intensity and profile to different dishes and personal preferences. It was like having a whole range of flavor bases derived from one core product. Imagine trying to explain this to a modern chef. Okay, so for this dish, we need fish sauce mixed with wine, and for this one, fish sauce mixed with water. No, not just diluted hydrogarum. It's different. The presence of garum permeated Roman society in a way few other foodstuffs did. Its production was a major industry, employing thousands. Its trade spanned the empire, linking distant provinces and fueling the economy. Its consumption was universal, bridging social divides as both a luxury item and a staple food. Its smell, as we've discussed, was a defining characteristic of coastal towns. It was discussed by philosophers, prescribed by doctors, or people acting as doctors, and consumed by emperors and slaves alike. It was a constant, pervasive element of Roman life. Think about the sheer volume of garum consumed. If even a fraction of the population used it daily, the demand would have been astronomical. The industrial scale of the factories, the vast numbers of amphorae produced, and the evidence of widespread trade all point to a society utterly dependent on this fermented fish sauce. It wasn't just a preference, it was a dietary and culinary necessity, providing flavor, salt, and nutrients in a world with limited options. It was the taste that defined an empire. So, when you picture garum, don't just see a bottle of smelly sauce. See a complex commodity that was a pillar of the Roman economy, a source of vital nutrition, a perceived medicinal remedy, and an indispensable ingredient that shaped the very taste of Roman cuisine. It was used in sophisticated dishes, in military rations, in home cooking, and even in dubious health treatments. It was everywhere, on everything, a liquid thread connecting disparate aspects of Roman life. It was far more than just a condiment. It was the flavor of Rome itself, bottled and shipped across the ancient world. And speaking of that flavor, and the factories that produced it, the story isn't complete without looking at where these famous factories were located and why, after centuries of dominance, this ubiquitous sauce eventually faded from prominence. It's time to explore the famous factories and the final decline of garum. You've seen how garum, that pungent, versatile liquid gold, was more than just a condiment, integrated into Roman life in myriad surprising ways. But where was all this stuff actually made on that massive, industrial scale? And if it was so essential, so ubiquitous, why isn't it sitting next to the ketchup and soy sauce on your supermarket shelf today? It's time to look at the famous factories that churned out this flavor, and explore the final, slow decline of Rome's favorite sauce. Garum production was concentrated in specific coastal regions blessed with abundant fish, easily accessible salt sources, and harbors for export. This is a mainstream historical fact. Sites like Belo Claudia and Cartiae in Hispania Baetica, southern Spain, Tenes, Tangier, in Mauritania, and Leptis Magna in North Africa were renowned centers of garum production, boasting extensive factory complexes with dozens or even hundreds of vats. You can visit the ruins of Belo Claudia today and see the remarkably well-preserved garum vats, silent witnesses to the sheer scale of the operation. Imagine standing there, looking into those empty tanks, trying to conjure the smells and sounds of 2,000 years ago, the bustling workers, the constant hum of flies, undoubtedly, and that overwhelming, pervasive aroma of fermenting fish. It wasn't just a few pits, it was a major industrial zone, dedicated solely to turning fish into sauce. These factories weren't just production sites, they were economic engines for their regions. They supported entire communities, providing jobs for fishermen, salt producers, potters, to make the amphorae, laborers, and merchants. The wealth generated by the garum trade contributed significantly to the prosperity of these coastal towns, allowing them to build impressive public buildings like theaters, temples, and forums, the ruins of which often sit right alongside the garum vats. It's a tangible link between Roman flavor and Roman prosperity. You could literally trace the funding for a new temple back to a particularly successful batch of fish guts. Yes, this beautiful marble column was sponsored by a particularly good year for macro garum exports. A slightly quirkier tidbit about these factories is the sheer amount of waste they generated. While the Romans were efficient in using the fish, the broken amphorae, sediment from the vats, and other refuse created massive mounds around the production sites. Monte Testaccio in Rome, mentioned earlier, is the most famous example of disposal related to consumption, but the factories themselves had their own waste issues. Some archaeological sites show evidence of these refuse piles, offering clues about the types of fish used, the pottery styles, and the scale of production over time. Imagine being the Roman equivalent of a waste management worker at a garum factory. That's a job that truly stinks, in every sense of the word. You definitely need a strong stomach, and maybe a very long shovel. Historians still argue whether the specific production techniques, salt-to-fish ratios, or fermentation times varied significantly between these famous factories, creating distinct brands of garum that were recognizable to Roman consumers across the empire. Was the garum sociorum from Bailo Claudia subtly different from the sociorum produced at Cartiae, and did connoisseurs have a preference? While regional variations in amphora styles and labeling suggest some differentiation, the extent to which specific factory methods created unique flavor profiles remains a subject of scholarly debate, pieced together from tantalizing but incomplete ancient sources. Maybe it was like modern regional variations in cheese or wine, subtle differences appreciated by those in the know. So, garum production was a thriving, large-scale industry for centuries, fueling Roman life and trade. But like all empires and industries, it eventually faced decline. The reasons aren't a single, dramatic event, but likely a combination of factors that unfolded over time, particularly in the later Roman Empire and its aftermath. One major factor was the decline and eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE. This led to widespread disruption of trade routes, economic instability, and political fragmentation. The sophisticated network that transported garum from coastal factories to distant provinces broke down. Without access to markets, and with local economies struggling, large-scale industrial production of a non-essential luxury/staple like garum became less viable. Imagine your main customers suddenly being unable to pay or reach you. You can't exactly ship amphorae of garum if the roads are unsafe and the ships are being used for war or have simply fallen into disrepair. The infrastructure of the empire was essential for the garum trade, and as that infrastructure crumbled, so too did the industry it supported. Another factor might have been changing culinary tastes and practices in the post-Roman world. As new cultures migrated into the former Roman territories and new cooking traditions emerged, the intense, fermented flavor profile of garum may have become less universally appealing. Ingredients and flavorings previously expensive or unavailable became more common. The emphasis in cooking might have shifted. While some form of fermented fish sauce likely persisted in certain areas or in more rudimentary forms, the industrial-scale production and widespread consumption of high-quality garum as a universal flavor base seems to have waned. It's like how certain food trends rise and fall. Maybe the world just moved on from the all-garum everything phase. Fermented fish is so last century, darling. Haven't you tried this new, exciting blend of boiled cabbage and desperation? Economic changes also played a role. The industrial scale of garum production required significant investment and reliable markets. As the economy contracted and became more localized in many areas after the empire's fall, the capital and demand needed to sustain large garum factories diminished. People might have reverted to more basic forms of food preservation like simple salting or drying, or relied on locally produced flavorings rather than importing sauce from distant lands. The era of importing tons of stinky sauce across continents became less practical and less necessary for many. Historians still argue whether disease, environmental changes, like shifts in fish populations, or even changing religious practices, some early Christian ascetic movements frowned upon rich foods and strong flavors, contributed significantly to the decline of garum production and consumption. Was there a plague that disproportionately affected garum factory workers? Did overfishing deplete the crucial mackerel stocks? Did people stop liking strong flavors because their priests told them it was sinful? The truth is likely a complex interplay of all these potential factors, varying in importance depending on the region and the specific time period. While the Roman industrial-scale garum industry faded, the concept of fermented fish sauce didn't disappear entirely from human history. Similar products continued to be made in parts of the Byzantine Empire, and notably, developed independently and thrived in Southeast Asian cuisines, where fish sauce remains a fundamental flavoring today. But the specific Roman method, the vast factories, the empire-wide trade network centered around garum, that largely vanished with the world that created it. So, the story of Roman garum ends not with a bang, but a gradual fading. The famous factories fell silent, the vats crumbled, and the amphorae were discarded. The trade routes that carried the pungent liquid across continents became less traveled. New flavors and culinary traditions emerged, and the indispensable sauce of the Roman world became, for many, a relic of the past, its powerful aroma fading into the mists of history, leaving behind only the archaeological evidence of its former dominance and the scattered mentions in ancient texts. It was a flavor that defined an empire, but ultimately it couldn't outlast it. And with the story of garum's rise and fall told, our journey through the stinky, fascinating world of Roman fish sauce comes to a close for tonight. You can let the images of sun-drenched vats, bustling markets, and amphora-laden ships gently drift away. The smells of the garum factories are fading now, replaced by the quiet calm of your own space. The complex flavors of ancient Rome are settling, no longer demanding your full attention. You can feel yourself relaxing, the day's worries dissolving like salt in warm brine. The sounds of the ancient world are quieting, the distant shouts of merchants, the creaking of carts, the lapping of waves against Roman shores. All becoming softer, more distant. You've explored a unique corner of history tonight, a pungent piece of the past that shaped an empire. That strong, savory taste, now just a memory. A historical curiosity. Letting go of the smells, letting go of the sounds. Just the gentle hum of your fan, the quiet darkness, and the feeling of settling down. Deeper and deeper into comfort. Everything is calm. Everything is still.